This was the scariest experience I've ever had, even though nothing actually happened in the end. There are a lot of assumptions in this story, so please bear with me. When I was in 3rd grade, I lived in a small apartment for a while. My grandfather had given us his house, but we had to renovate it, so we stayed in the apartment for about 6 months. It was old and smelled musty, but it was close to our usual home and cheap, so my parents chose it. Naturally, since it was cheap, there were quite a few tenants. I remember there were people living on both sides of our unit. On one side, there was a kind elderly couple. On the other side, there was a stout, gloomy man and an older woman who seemed to be his mother. Let's call the man A. The older woman was quite friendly. She would say things like "have a good day" in the mornings and chat with my mom whenever they ran into each other. A, on the other hand, seemed to have some kind of disorder. His facial expressions were a bit off, and he behaved strangely. For example, he would wander the hallways at night for no reason, or lie down in the elevator mumbling to himself. Because of this, not just my family but also other residents in the building kept a certain distance from him and his mother, even though they remained friendly with the mother. Perhaps because of this, about a month after we moved in, I started seeing less and less of the older woman. By the 3rd month, she had completely disappeared. Strangely, A also vanished along with her. I figured they had moved out. One day, when I was coming home from school, I felt an eerie gaze on me. I looked around, thinking maybe a friend was nearby, but I saw no one. It felt strange, and then I noticed something. The door to A's apartment was slightly open. The apartment doors weren't automatic or anything fancy, but they were designed to close on their own due to their weight. That meant if a door was slightly open, it had to be because someone was holding it from behind or something was blocking it from closing completely. I wondered if it had been left open by mistake, maybe even by a burglar. As I stared at it, wondering what to do, the door suddenly slammed shut with a loud bang. I was startled, but I reasoned that the building was old, and the door must have been loose or misaligned, causing it to shut on its own. The next day, when I returned home from school, I saw the same thing. The door was slightly open again. I figured it was just an issue with the door's alignment. But as I was walking past it, I heard a faint creak. The door moved just a little, as if someone was carefully closing it. That was the moment I realized someone was behind the door. At the time, I was convinced that A and his mother had moved out, so I panicked, thinking there was an intruder inside. I bolted for my own apartment and locked the door behind me. When my parents came home, I told them that someone had been in the supposedly empty apartment next door. But they dismissed it, saying, "What are you talking about? That's still Mr. So-and-so's place." Apparently, even though the woman was no longer seen, there were still occasional noises coming from inside the apartment. My parents assumed A's family was still living there. After that, it became a daily occurrence. Every morning when I left, the door was properly shut, but when I came home, it was always slightly ajar. At first, I was scared, but since nothing ever happened, and I knew it wasn't a burglar, I eventually got used to it. One day, I was heading home with some friends, planning to hang out at my place. As we approached my apartment, I saw that same door, slightly open again. I didn't think much of it. Nothing had ever actually happened, so I just walked past it. But at that moment, a thick arm suddenly shot out from the gap and grabbed my wrist tightly. Before I could react, it started pulling me toward the door, yanking me inside. I screamed and struggled with all my strength, but scratching and pulling away did nothing. The grip was unrelenting. Luckily, my friend noticed my cries and rushed over. He grabbed a small gardening shovel that was lying nearby and stabbed the arm with it. A shriek, somewhere between a scream and a moan, came from behind the door, and the grip loosened instantly. I broke free and ran straight to my apartment, fumbling with the keys before locking myself inside. But once I was safe inside, a new problem dawned on me. Now I was trapped. If I left, I might be grabbed again. I didn't even know who to call. After some panicked deliberation, we decided to distract ourselves by playing video games. Looking back, that was unbelievably reckless. Time passed, and around 5 p.m., my mother finally came home. I frantically told her everything, but at first, she didn't believe me. It wasn't until my friend backed me up that she finally took it seriously. She decided to drive my friends home since it was getting late. Later, one of my friends told me that even when they were leaving, the door to that apartment was still slightly open. A little while later, my father returned. My mother had already called him, so as soon as he got home, he went straight to the apartment manager to lodge a complaint. Feeling relieved, I turned on the TV and tried to relax. But soon, I heard commotion from the next apartment. My father rushed back inside, whispered something to my mother, and then left again. I didn't see him for the rest of the night. Now, everything from this point on is secondhand information. But from what I was later told, what they found in that apartment was horrifying. The manager had used a spare key to open the door, only to find hanging from the ceiling, he had taken his own life. That in itself would have been shocking enough, but the condition of the room made it even worse. From the ceiling, dozens of nooses hung, each one carefully secured with hooks. He had used one of them for himself. Then, they found something even more disturbing, countless photographs of young boys. Some were blurry, some were hidden in the shadows, but all of them had clearly been taken in secret. And among them was a picture of me, clenched tightly in A's dead hand. But the worst part? A letter was discovered, seemingly left by his mother. It read, "If things become too hard, use these, the ropes. If you ever want to take a friend with you, there are extras." I don't know all the exact details, as my father only told me what he felt I could handle once I was an adult. But that was the gist of it. I don't mean to insult people with disabilities, but to this day, I can't understand what was going through A's mind. What was he thinking when he grabbed my arm? Was he just lonely, wanting to talk? If so, maybe things wouldn't have ended this way. But if he had been planning to take me with him, if he had intended to hang me from one of those nooses, then the thought alone is terrifying. This remains the scariest experience of my life.